Hello, beautiful visionaries. Today, I'm so happy to bring to you a friend from Barcelona by the name of Benjamin de Loenen. Benjamin is a Belgian-born filmmaker who got captivated by the human stories that he filmed for his film school project iboga, Rite of Passage, which is about the traditional and addiction treatment uses of iboga. And this led him to dedicate his life to making ayahuasca, iboga, and other plant practices into valued and integrated parts of society. He founded the organization ISEERS, which has played an important role in advancing this cause. He and I are going to talk about what it's truly going to take to transform society's relationship with psychoactive plants. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey. What led you from being a filmmaker to becoming a founder of a non-governmental organization that is advocating for the social acceptance of the use of psychoactive plants?
Yeah, so a little bit as you explained in the introduction, kind of my coming to iboga and reading an article about it when I was a film student. That in a way was the beginning, at the same time the end of my film career as it was. Because I just got so captivated filming people, sitting next to their beds while they were going through their iboga experiences. People who were suffering a lot. Some had issues with drug use for over 20 years. Really had a significant trauma, and just seeing how they, within that experience were changing so much their perception of themselves, self-acceptance, love towards the people they had harmed or their family members. So I just felt after making the film and really getting very close to a lot of people in the iboga movement, that was such an important topic to bring. No, there was at that time virtually no information around it available. Kind of having finished the film, I started to present it at conferences in different film festivals, and just saw how the human stories behind the film just really, came to people, and where people really were touched and also felt this was important. So realizing that kind of, showing the human stories behind these plants and also the science that supports it, bringing that in a well-packaged way to the public. Was something I then felt really drawn to. So for 5 more years I worked as a film and TV editor in other programs, but my heart was just drawn so much to that topic. And then at some point as well in 2006 I had my personal experience with ayahuasca, and just was blown away by the impact that had on my life, and could share it in my family as well, and just my experience and how that kind of led to growth in myself and my loved ones. So at some point I just couldn't do anything else than set up a non-profit organization and really start to educate through that route and try to reach people with the balanced information about these very, at that time, quite unknown plants.
One of the things that really struck me was the film that I saw that you had produced at the World Ayahuasca Conference about ayahuasca. Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit about that film project and what you discovered around the legalization or the what it took for you to educate people about the ritual and therapeutic uses of ayahuasca and some of the perspectives you were getting back from mainstream doctors and especially like the Chilean officials. I found that to be really astounding.
Yeah, that film is a project that actually was never started as a film project. It was something that just happened in 2010. Just 1 year after I started ISEERS, some people in Chile contacted me, and through actually 3 different people, they got to us saying, there's these people working in Chile with ayahuasca, combining modern psychotherapeutic practices with very traditional indigenous kind of ceremonial practice with ayahuasca. And they were just raided, a squad, a whole SWAT team fell in, and they basically are now in jail and facing prosecution. So I had no idea. We had no idea on what to do with that, but it's obviously some knowledge about the more scientific and technical aspects of ayahuasca. and got in touch with them. No? So from there, a whole journey started where we kind of tried to help in the best way possible. There was a lot of very bad media attention around it. One of the toxicologists who's in the film was the public speaker talking about the risks of ayahuasca and all the dangers. But in the interview that I did with her, which is in the film, it's very clear that she really had no clue. She didn't even know there was scientific research that was conducted into ayahuasca. So, so it was just so striking to see the ignorance, really, and the ignorance that's kind of having the face of the public prosecutor's expert team, which was what made it into the media. And so just being, in touch with those people, kind of filming that process all until the court, and seeing also how within the court, all of a sudden, again, the education, and bringing human stories. There were people who had participated in ceremonies who came to court to testify. They also, participated in the film. There were some scientists that we also helped, get there. That we get them in touch with, and they were willing to testify. So all of that, really helped to educate the judges. And basically quite heavily destroyed the whole discourse, very reductionistic discourse of the prosecutor, who literally boiled down just DMT, one active molecule, which according to him is illegal, and therefore this whole thing is illegal. And he didn't take into account any cultural or spiritual or human rights dimensions of this practice. So with that first experience, and then having filmed that, really a whole journey began in supporting other cases, and seeing again on how if you bring really good arguments all together around human rights, around kind of the legality and the complexity of these practices, and making people understand that maybe on first sight they think they're just judging a substance and one molecule, but that really it's not just about the molecule, it's not just about the brew, it's not about ayahuasca, it's about the whole complex practice, and the risks, the human value, everything you have to see always within the context and everything that goes with it, and not just trying to boil that down to one substance. So that film was very significant in kind of shaping the work and the vision for the organization as well. And the screening in Rio Branco at the conference was just a pre-screener. Actually, kind of the next edition we're going to have a big screening, with the finalized film.
What I found really interesting was the side-by-side dialogue, between what the toxicologist, the Chilean toxicologist was saying, and the scientist that had done all the research into ayahuasca's effects. Who was that individual that you portrayed side by side?
Yeah, so the researcher was Jordi Riba, who's one of the people who has done most research since, I think, for now more than a decade or more than 15 years, been researching ayahuasca in laboratory contexts or in clinical trials and observational research. There were some more, people in that film as well who had done research. But then on the other side, there was the toxicologist who, in her head, she kind of had this idea that ayahuasca must be acting on these different receptor sites, and then theoretically you can, get whatever it is, a stroke or a seizure or a heart attack. But actually, she never ever studied it in real life. No, so we did the whole interview. It was about 40 minutes. And then after 40 minutes, I asked her, so what do you think about the research that, that people have done in Spain and in other parts of the world? And she was like, oh, I've never heard of that, but, this must be unethical research, even though it was all done with permission from the ethics committee and the medical agencies. But yeah, it's ignorance versus knowledge, no? And that's basically the big struggle we have when facing, or talking about this phenomena with policymakers or judges, and in the general public.
Yeah, so there's definitely much more that I would like to touch upon around the legal context, but I want to take a step back and just address the current phenomena that's actually what is creating so many more encounters with law enforcement and landing so many more cases around the use of ayahuasca in courtrooms. And so that is the current globalization of ayahuasca, and it's just not even just ayahuasca, it's ayahuasca and other plant medicines. So what do you think about what is happening right now, this expansion of plant medicines around the world?
Yeah, I think really, I mean, the genie is out of the bottle, no? That's how it seems. It's been going on for some years, but, it's really gone into a crescendo. And it really shows that, we're living in a moment where a lot of people are seeking ways to engage with their health, with their life, kind of getting deeper meaning in why we are alive and living in the world that we're living in now, no? With all the political challenges, the environmental challenges. There are just very challenging times where I think also we have lost our trust in the authorities, in the government. There's corruption and corporate interest, religious institutions that also people less and less kind of feel as a reference. It's just, there's a difficult crisis, no? And people, I think, are looking for, touching or connecting again with our nature and our roots, really, as human beings on this planet and living a more harmful life. I think also kind of social dislocation and, maybe with all the digital world we live in, kind of the lack of human connection that a lot of people have. So I think what's happening really is that, we are looking for adaptogens, cultural adaptogens to struggles, and obstacles that we are facing, and for the environment that we are living in as a human species, which is in a way similar to what indigenous cultures have been, doing in the past. I mean, the role of ayahuasca and iboga and these other plants really are, in a way, I think, cultural adaptogens where, they really have helped, these communities deal with colonialism, with, this greed of extraction companies, oil companies, mining companies. If you look at some of the threats that some of these communities have been facing for so long, they could have well all been dead, and all the knowledge and culture could have been lost. But I think, and when you talk to them, also the kind of the knowledge or the role of these plants and the ceremonial practice for the survival of the tribe has been crucial, no? So I think, it's in a way ayahuasca mostly. I think that's the one who has become more known and really has spread very much. Iboga to a lesser extent, some of the other plants as well. But they really have traveled because there's an interest in having experiences that can help people overcome suffering, deal with the outside world and just be better, citizens in the society. So that has happened. At the same time, this is fantastic because more and more people really have been able to benefit from this. There's a big benefit to many people, and that's why it's been growing, I think. But at the same time, there's challenges that come with that that are significant. There's more and more opportunism. Some of the practices or marketing we're seeing is really kind of scary and, kind of indicates that something needs to be done to really steward this in the right direction. We also in ICE, we have a support service, psychological support. We, help quite a lot of people who just have been given ayahuasca or other related plants and then never really had the good support and are on their own. They're struggling. So also damage is done through improper use and through lack of really integration and of these practices in our contemporary society. So I think it's important that we as a community and specifically the practitioners' communities are aware of the responsibility they have, of the collective responsibility they have. And that really we should also think of, again, as a community, saying what is the way forward and dialogue about really, what that looks like, to fully integrate these practices in our contemporary society, what it looks like to do ethical practice, safety, everything that comes with it. And, avoid situations like in Holland where now recently there was a program who went undercover filming in ayahuasca ceremonies, where some of the practitioners made quite bold health claims and kind of a very negative image came out. That was just before a court case, and now the court case ended in them saying ayahuasca is really dangerous for public health, and really going 3 steps forward and then 2 steps back. No, so
yeah, because they were one of the first countries to actually decriminalize ayahuasca. Right, Holland, right? I mean, I vaguely recall that the churches were allowed to operate. So what is the situation with ayahuasca in Holland, and has it officially regressed?
It has for sure regressed. I mean, the thing is that there was an incident, a raid, and a court case started, and that has had many chapters. So that process really never ended, always was ongoing. No, it went to different courts. There was a problem because at some point one of the groups brought their case that they lost to the European Court of Human Rights. If you look at the arguments that they used, I don't think it was very well presented. And then it arrived in that court. They didn't accept the case, but they emitted a report which basically states, the right to religious freedom is less important than, really the health risks that ayahuasca means for public health. So that was not really a precedent because it wasn't really an outcome of a court case, but it was, it's the highest authority in Europe of human rights that basically makes those claims. And that then got back and really started to affect, the situation in Holland. At the same time, several people have been arrested last year. I think there were several arrests that we were in touch with. Benki from, the Brazil was one of the leaders, indigenous leaders as well, who was arrested there. In the end, things ended quite okay. But it's for sure.
Let me ask you about that. So are you talking about the recent situation with Benki, about how he went to the police to be able to complain about some of the threats against his life? Or are you talking about another case?
No, I'm talking to his travel to Holland, where he was basically arrested with ayahuasca in the airport. And then, eventually we got in touch, but then, at some point he was let out, and it didn't come to an formal accusation. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that, indigenous leaders, and as well as kind of European practitioners, sometimes people really trained in traditional context, sometimes they are doing more therapeutic work or daime or other religious contexts, they also face prosecution often. And so in some countries there's very bad for problematic law, like in Russia there's 2 cases. So in some cases it's specifically prohibited in some countries, and in others it isn't. But there is no legal certainty, and things are happening, and I think it's getting more and more severe because it's getting out there. The media is, on top of it. There's, whenever there's an incident, they never really focus on all the good that these plans also have brought. It's just also, focusing on this one incident with the question very often, like, okay, do we need to really make this totally illegal and prohibit? And sometimes a good article comes out. It was a recent one in The Guardian where they actually talk about challenges or incidents within the framework of we should really regulate this, no? And so I think if the community, if we collaborate and we really have dialogue to come up with steps and agreements on how to really start self-regulating or agree on certain boundaries of practice, then at some point we will move to a place where authorities can also distinguish between ethical, constructive, beneficial practices or really opportunistic, dangerous practice, which can really destroy people as well. So that for now it's all put in the same sack when it comes to authorities or in the court. They don't really understand very much the distinction between what criminal behavior looks like, which also sometimes happens, no? Where somebody is kind of criminal-minded and then finds ayahuasca. Well, this is yet another tool, but if it wouldn't be ayahuasca, it would be something else. And so understanding that when horrible things happen, what is really the cause of it, and not just immediately saying this is ayahuasca or this is iboga that just made somebody crazy. We need to move toward that place, where there can be more nuance in understanding the risks and the impact of these practices.
Yeah, and to also keep things in perspective too, for all the people that have died from ayahuasca or iboga, far more people die from alcohol. And it's interesting to see how lawmakers and officials just don't seem to even consider that it's only because of a cultural bias, really, that there's this cultural bias towards alcohol, and that happens to also be their drug of choice. So when there's like something that's exotic that comes from a faraway place, and of course the ritual behind it, it can seem like a very frightening thing, even though the fatality rate is considerably lower than many of the other drugs that are socially acceptable.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, there's a big lack of understanding, really, and I understand there's fear for the unknown. So if I would be a policymaker and I would not know anything about this, I would be afraid, no? And if you look at some of the marketing around centers, it's really worrying. There's health claims. People might choose to drink ayahuasca instead of seeking other medical treatment because certain expectations and promises for and health claims that are brought out. So there is worry, but it needs to be seen in perspective. I also think that every fatality is one too much, and that most of it can be avoided. I mean, there's always people can also just have a heart attack without doing anything. But I think always when there is an incident, we as a community need to also be able to talk about risks and when an incident happened, think, okay, what happened and how can this be avoided? What can we learn from this to really make sure this never happens again. And really, that between people, we all really exchange really objective information about what are the benefits, but also what are the limitations, what are the risks, and how can we really avoid them. No? But some unfortunate thing which we have felt is, at some point we published something about the risks of combining bufo with ayahuasca, and just. Was very, scientifically based information. There are some incidents that happened with that. We figured that was important because there's this trend of just mixing different things. But we got so much criticism, on that from practitioners, from people like, no, you're alarming. But I think if we ourselves can talk about risks and how to really avoid, damage to happen, I think there's something wrong. No? So I think it is important, not done in an alarming way, but in just a very open and objective way. Okay, this is what's happening. What are the implications of that behavior or those practices?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think about the kind of outcry around, oh no, like it's dangerous to this organization is saying it's dangerous to serve both of these psychoactive compounds within a short period time frame. I mean, a lot of that motivation is coming from like, oh no, I can't earn more money by offering bufo after ayahuasca. To me, that's what that seems like. I mean, I think that in any situation where there could be a risk of fatality, there needs to be the utmost consideration and safeguards to prevent anyone from coming to an unfortunate demise during an unfortunate and unexpected death during a ceremonial context, because that not only affects the person who might be the casualty, but also the group of people that are bearing witness to this.
Yeah, totally. And it's again what I say, it's collective responsibility. That's what we have. If something's more accepted socially or it's more integrated, if somebody in somewhere does something wrong, that's going to affect that person and the victim or the person, the other people affected in that area. But it's not going to really have a major impact on the whole community and sometimes internationally. But what we see with something like ayahuasca or iboga, where it's very poorly understood. There's a lot of confusion around it. It is seen as a threat to public health by many. So whenever somebody really doesn't take precaution and doesn't really take responsibility for actions, then that's really gonna just affect everybody. So that's why I think we all have to be careful, and not be kind of the elephant in the porcelain shop, and be sensible, no? And we have to really kind of demonstrate as well, I think, as a community, that we can be responsible and really steward these practices in a sensible way in our contemporary society.
So there was a recent death in Florida. Do you have any information as to what happened?
No, I mean, I saw the media piece around it as well. I don't have more information about that. So I can't speak to that because, one thing to always be very careful about is believing what is said in the media, mostly media. There was this recent death also of Matthew Mellon, was quite a famous cryptocurrency investor, who went to Mexico to an ibogaine clinic and then, basically was, ended up dead. And they were immediately like, he was killed by ibogaine, no? Mm-hmm. And also news came out, he was killed by ayahuasca. But the reality of it was the real story that came out later, in some of the big media channels, was that person had done ayahuasca 1 year before, and really never repeated. So it wasn't at all the ayahuasca which killed him. He had suffered from, severe drug dependency for a long time. Went to an ibogaine clinic, but the night before in the hotel or wherever he was, ended up dying from an overdose. So he never made it to the ibogaine clinic. So it wasn't ibogaine either. Mm-hmm. But the first thing I was going to an ibogaine clinic, ibogaine killed this man. No? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if what is talked about the center of SoulQuest is that it was Cambo that. Killed that person, or where he died after Cambo, and it wasn't specifically after ayahuasca. But yeah, it's important to really know what really happened there, and then also what's the impact going to be of that incident, on the group who's leading that church, but also kind of in the broader community in the United States. Mm-hmm. So it's for sure, a tragic situation.
What I will also, like to highlight too is that, there rarely ever is any kind of follow-up after a story, ends up in the news, and a lot of understanding what has been, what is the cause of a fatality is the toxicology report. And so, that is rarely ever made public. Yeah. And so therefore, the news goes out and then, the public doesn't really end up knowing what truly happened.
Exactly.
So it's very easy for, the story to get distorted. Could be that the person was taking other drugs that had, the contraindicative effects, and, maybe the person was informed, maybe they weren't. So there's a lot of variables. I do want to...
I also, just one thing
sure.
related to that, which I would recommend people to look at. There's a publication done by Rafael Guimarães, which we have on our blog, news.icers.org. There's a blog post somewhere there about an article that he published where he really looked at all the fatalities or incidents that have ended up in the media or were known. We're looking into what is the real evidence that's available on what happened there. And his conclusion is that he talks about ayahuasca per se, which is ayahuasca that doesn't contain, say, amounts of toe or other plants, but kind of just a classic ayahuasca. And his conclusion was that in most cases, all of them basically that he researched, there was either not enough evidence, there was no toxicology report, or it was really clear that it was not the ayahuasca that caused the fatality. And so that's a scientific publication where he really goes through a lot of these documented incidents.
Can you share that link with us so I can put it on the webpage?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to ask you about these health claims that you see that these other facilitators or centers are promoting. What are some health claims that are really something that we don't really know if ayahuasca can cure, and therefore people shouldn't be making claims that the ceremony will do that?
Yeah, I mean, the classical thing is like ayahuasca cures cancer, and yes, it's true that there's people who felt relief or support in ayahuasca experiences in dealing with cancer. So, for some people, this has been a positive add-on to the therapy or treatment they were having. But, claiming that ayahuasca cures cancer, first of all, there's many types of cancer. Mm-hmm. Some drugs work for some types of cancer. We've seen this with cannabis as well, no? Where now they're looking at cannabinoids, and some work for some specific types of cancer. But when people claim that they are just curing, your cancer or even curing addiction, which is I think a very false promise. Somebody saying they can cure an addiction. In the first place, addiction doesn't seem to be a disease and not something just curable by one little thing. Those are the type of things you see very often. No? Kind of the quick fix message, I think, is very problematic. In a way, our society really kind of potentiates that type of seeking. No, and the pill, and you take a pill and it's gone, your depression is gone. So I think, also people ask us very often, where do we drink ayahuasca? We can't recommend any places, but just people should really look at what is the message or the way a center looks at working with ayahuasca. And the reality is it's hard work. These experiences are not pleasant. Iboga is very hard work. And they can be very beneficial and helpful in people who are committed, who are well informed, who want to make a change in life. But it's not a quick fix. Like I just take a pill and my problems are gone. No? So when a center really promotes it like that, where they kind of promote good preparation and a good integration as part as a whole, I think that's kind of more the places where people will have or find better support and good context for their processes. I think also it's very important that we are careful. Kind of the medical model, which has been developing around other psychedelics, MDMA, psilocybin as well. Kind of ayahuasca has been used for so long in cultural context, for spiritual purposes, in indigenous communities, but there is no drug development around ayahuasca that's going on. Any medical or scientific claims, that are about, let's say, cure of cancer or so, are just speculative. And so I think kind of getting into that framework, or ayahuasca is a treatment, for something, or can really cure something, people should be very careful with that, no? Because we don't want to create false expectations. We don't want to, give people this idea like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then just one night and my problem is fixed, no? And yes, science is demonstrating some of its applications for depression now. There was a double-blind study that was done in Brazil, which shows it can be, very useful for depression. Takiwashi has been, using ayahuasca for quite a while, for probably 30 years, for addiction treatment. So there are, those focuses in certain centers or practices, and with iboga as well, we know quite a lot about how iboga works. But still, we have to be very careful, no? Because there is not enough hard science to really make those scientific claims, and be a bit more maybe subtle or modest about. These plants can really support people in their processes, but it's not for everybody, and it's not for everybody at any time in their life. So people should be really ready. And sometimes at some point in life, somebody really, could have a good beneficial experience, but maybe in another moment in life, they really are not in that position. It has to do with their social environment, with many other factors, and there's just this commodification that we sometimes see. So like if you haven't done ayahuasca, you're not cool, or you're not, that all of that I think is really highly problematic, and really people should know what it is, and if they really feel attracted to it, know how to look for a responsible place to have their experience.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I'd like to hear more about the program that you have in place at ICERS called the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, and some of your experience in legal cases and in the courtroom.
Yeah, so that's been going on. I mean, that type of practice in supporting cases has been going on, as I said, since 2010, when this Chilean case got involved with us. Also, one thing we achieved then was we wrote to the INCB, the International Narcotics Control Board, which is a UN body of drug control, and basically asking them what's the status of ayahuasca. In 2001, I think it is, for the Dutch case, they said it's not under international control. So we got a response, and we got a letter that said, well, actually ayahuasca is not under international law or in the international control, and countries can have their specific additional laws making ayahuasca illegal. No? For the case of Chile, we then wrote to the national authorities, and they said we have no information, and that combination was a very strong argument in court to say, well, actually technically it's not illegal in Chile. No? So, and really we learned over time to really kind of make science and scientific evidence useful and understandable for a judge, for a prosecutor, to just, build a narrative, with all the references scientific publications. So, it's really been in a way a journey in the beginning. We learned a lot as well in that first court from the lawyer and for the defendants who really fought until the last moment, even though they were severely under pressure. And then we started to really bring the knowledge that we got from that experience to other people who contacted us in other parts of the world. And slowly professionalizing. No? And then at the World Ayahuasca Conference in Ibiza in 2014, we brought together a bunch of the lawyers who had won cases, some policy people, legal strategists, and that was kind of the first step to really develop a program around this. We called the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, which, most of the work we do is around ayahuasca, but not all of it. We called it Ayahuasca Defense Fund because kind of 95% of the cases are ayahuasca related, but we have defended some peyote cases, San Pedro, iboga, so it's broader than that, no? But yeah, the interesting thing there is that really kind of the cultural context of it, a judge, they're used to seeing cocaine traffickers, guns, a lot of money, type of profile, and then they see this person with some feathers in a brown bottle, talking about personal development, and it's like, what is this, no? So very often we see the judges, they don't know what to do with this. It's a very new topic. They can't even pronounce the word ayahuasca, and so kind of they're very receptive generally to kind of inputs from expert witnesses, and so that's where we try to come in, no? And we work with the lawyers that people have, or if they haven't found lawyers, we connect them with the lawyers. And then work with them as a team to really see, based on the conditions, what is the best defense. With the, obviously the ultimate goal is to really set a precedent, or to kind of keep the door at least open and not shut down in a negative outcome. But the first, obviously most important, is always the freedom of the individual. So sometimes there's a plea bargain that comes out. So there's different levels of success. No, in the case in Chile, for example, at the end, the judge recognized it was actually beneficial for the participants, recognized it's not illegal in Chile, even it's not a Supreme Court outcome and doesn't really set a hard precedent, that helps. And they really kind of had a very good message on, the way they had understood what ayahuasca really is after seeing all this, defense. And then there's kind of the worst case in Russia, where ayahuasca is illegal, and then they're very harsh on drug penalties. So there's somebody in jail, got, I think it's 5 years, or maybe then, at the beginning it was 5, I think, then was reduced. It's a success because he could have gotten 20 years, no? And they really asked for a very much higher penalty. So at the end, the outcome was less, and we are still working, with those cases there. A plea bargain is sometimes frustrating, and people, because a lot of people, they really believe in what they do, no, and they hold these practices sacred. So to then have to declare guilty to get away with some community service or a small fine, really doesn't feel right. No, it's something that's really tragic, and so we're close to a lot of human suffering as well, seeing people go through that. And I think sometimes I wish that people would have a more sense of really understanding that, that's a possibility, and that really, they need to be careful and just be intelligent on how to work, and really understanding the risks that people are working in, which is different from country to country. In one of the cases now, we are actually sometimes an email comes in from the defendant from jail, and knowing that person might be in jail for a very long time. So it's tragic, because you see people who are trying to serve their communities, they're trying to do a good job to help people. They really do it from their heart, and then end up being all of a sudden seen as criminals, and just end up sometimes being severely prosecuted. So it's a process. It's important, and we quite a lot of cases. We have our hands full. We have some of the great success stories. One woman who was arrested in Spain. She was from another country, and then just basically didn't know what to do, waiting, being lost, and just being able to give some moral support, be in touch, making people feel they're not alone in that journey. Mm-hmm. And then right before Christmas, almost as a Christmas gift, got freed, and charges were dropped and could go home. But yeah, it's quite I think it's important work, because we're learning a lot, and we're kind of also shaping more our strategies, and just also for us to really have an overview on what's going on internationally, and certain patterns, and how one thing can influence the other. That's just very, very important. I think that we can have that idea and that helicopter view, and adjust our strategies based on that.
Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned a number of times the need for the community to work together and to self-regulate, perhaps, or for there to be better collaboration on how these types of activities are being conducted. While on one hand it seems like, yes, absolutely, that's important, the most difficult question is how. How exactly do we get the ayahuasca community, which is comprised of so many different kinds of people from different backgrounds, offering the medicine in different ways. How do we get them to all come to a consensus? It seems very difficult, especially, I will also say, before you answer, that as an observer, it seems like there's almost like two ayahuasca communities. There's the ayahuasca community of South America, and especially the indigenous, and they've got their own concerns. And then, of course, there's like the rest of the world and Western practitioners and all of that, which, often these practitioners are not very, very much in touch with the indigenous people. And so there's a separation almost. So what are your thoughts on how we can all work together?
I think there's more separation. I mean, we're all connected and we're all one, but at the same time, every country is different. And so in the past, there's been, this initiative, the Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council, which really, responded to this need for self-regulation. But then the strategy was really from an international body to kind of regulate, certify, and so forth. No? Kind of, over time, I think it has become clear to us. It's become clear that the strategy that's important, I think, is to really work locally. Where in a specific country or a region of a country, there's a lot of practitioners. They generally hardly ever sit together. They don't really communicate with each other, but they're really all kind of engaging in practices with the same plants. No, everybody has their different opinions and their different ideas, and there's just a lack of communication. So if one practitioner does something which is really problematic, or there might be an incident, that really is going to affect everybody. And so very often you see that many people in that community saw things coming or saw different challenges, but didn't have the tools or the support structure to really deal with that. So just bringing people together on a more national or local level, depending on the size of the country, to have dialogues, to really start talking about, okay, how do we represent our work? What are the common things we can agree on? What do we have in common? What are the ethical boundaries of our practice? And to really have those dialogues, and out of that kind of all grow together, because asking the right questions really, helps you also solve certain issues or get to steward it in a better direction. And then really kind of where it's not just one group organizes in a good way, but it's also as a collective in that region or country to organize strongly, so there is a support structure. In case there's a situation, they know who to call, or they have support from each other as well. And through that, really kind of set the basis for then engaging with policymakers, or really be able, when the time comes, or when there's a court case, or when there's opportunity to engage with policymakers, to really be able to represent that properly and say, we are responsible people. We have thought a lot about this. This is the way we are, making sure that there's standards and there's safety and ethics, and be able to uphold, be an example, and live the example you want to see in this world. So that's kind of something that can be done, and something we are also working around. And very often when we are doing legal defense through the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, sometimes you have great people. They're well organized. They really are good representatives. They can talk about their work in a very good way. They have some screening protocols. They uphold certain ethics, and defending those people is really are good partnerships, because you're really defending somebody who has really their stuff together. And but sometimes that's not the case, Sometimes there's people who have done all this marketing with all these health claims online. There's some incidents. There might be some, sexual behavior. How do you defend that? It's very difficult to defend because there is problematic, practice or problematic behavior involved. So, and there's, different types of people. Some really just don't care about any advice. They do whatever they want to do. But I also think there's a lot of people who kind of are just not well enough informed, or they think they want to do things right. They have good intentions, but just they're lacking knowledge or training. And so how can, those people be well informed and get that additional training if needed, or really just get a good perspective so they understand, how they are operating and what the context is that they're operating in. So I think, for us, the Ayahuasca Defense, or the World Ayahuasca Conference, is a space where, we try to bring together all of these different perspectives. Some people with international perspectives, indigenous perspectives as well, and trying to kind of create some cross-fertilization between all those perspectives, so that everybody goes home with and having grown and having had more crucial information. But what do you say? There is now that there's also kind of a more cultural interchange, and people from indigenous communities are traveling beyond their territories and engaging with Westerns and the other way around. There are two worlds, but they also connect, no? And I think also not just falling into this idea like, we have to make sure that there's enough ayahuasca for us here in the West. It's like, no, we have to explore equal, partnerships between indigenous communities and the Western world, and how can we all benefit from, the fact that these practices are spreading, and not just, again, kind of the extractionism, like, there's something there of our interest, we take it and we live with that. No? So there's just a lot of dialogue needed, and I think a lot of our work at ICEERS is trying to convene those spaces. In the next conference we're going to do, we really try to make a very international one, getting more indigenous representation and Western representation, and really be able to discuss some of those topics of human rights as well, sustainability, but planetary sustainability, and how can the lessons and the values that some of these indigenous communities have upheld, living in harmony with nature, and how can we really benefit from that as a human species, and not just fall again in this one substance we are interested in, let's get it and have our experience and that's it, no? But it's complicated.
It is very complicated. It's very controversial. People get really triggered and angry and all of that. And, I just want to encourage anyone who's listening out there, like, there are going to be difficult conversations, and there may be a lot of strong emotions that come up. And I think the most important thing to do is to listen and to hear where other people are coming from. Don't just start to, accuse or reject, or just be all angry and defensive about things if it doesn't, fit in your worldview, or, just if we're unable to set aside our differences around these very difficult topics, and if we cannot set aside our differences to hold the space for, constructive conversations, we're just going to end up fighting each other, and we're never going to get anywhere as a collective. So, I've seen so many negative conversations, in the world of in the shamanism groups and the ayahuasca groups around this event. Also, I've been dealing with haters, and it's like, come on, let's just get over some of these initial responses, and just hey, everyone who is has something to contribute and has a perspective, and it's equally valid as yours. So
I think is how my colleague Andrea from ICEERS always says, the work is really this, no? I mean, people have their experiences and you have new insights and new ideas, but the work is really trying to kind of work together in this life here on this planet, and trying to move things forward as a collective, and being able to overcome our differences, our differences in opinion, and these practices are sacred to many people, so it's something very dear to their heart. And when there's threats by behavior of other people or so, it's something very intense. And it's what you say, the discussions under the conference we did in Brazil was very, very intense, a lot of conflict, but I think it was very positive at the end, because also to have that emerge in a way where things can be discussed and where different perspectives and worries and hopes can be shared by different people in the community. At the end, we all grow by having that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to, kind of start to wrap things up since we're coming close to the end of the conversation. I, know that you guys do a lot of work with iboga, so I was wondering if you could share, your views on, iboga's expansion in contemporary society. Are there similarities or differences with what you're seeing with ayahuasca?
Yeah, iboga is also became more popular, not as much as ayahuasca. It's also, quite a difficult medicine to work with. No, it's quite intense. There's some health effects that need to be taken into account. Also, traditionally, it's something that people do more once in a lifetime or a few times, and it's very different from ayahuasca in that sense. And so, I think with iboga, it has really gotten in a very different path, because it became known through the discovery in the West, through the discovery of Howard Lotzov, and how it was useful for treating opiate dependency. And so it was kind of the medical subculture is what emerged from that. No? In the beginning, there were very few centers. Now there's more and more. Recently, also, you see more ceremonial uses based on kind of witty practice that are taking place with some more people in ceremony. But I think, one thing we're doing now, on one hand, is advancing research, because there's really a lack of scientific research that can support the claims about, the use of ayahuasca or of ibogaine for drug dependency treatment. So there's a study in Brazil now for alcoholism that was approved in December, the first one where we are collaborating with, so that's a major step forward, phase 2 clinical trial. There's now also in some other places things moving forward, so that's really hopeful. At the same time, we just engaged also in an inquiry process with the broader international iboga community, including indigenous voices, to really also see, what is really the state of ibogaine in the world? What are the needs? There's sustainability, I think, is really much more challenging with iboga, because it just comes from one region, from Gabon, Cameroon. And even though there's way less use of iboga than ayahuasca, there's just a very small territory of supply. And there's some other iboga that's made from Voacanga africana as well, from another plant, semi-synthesized. But there's a lot of unclarity. A lot of the sources of iboga are unclear. There's more and more clinics popping up. There's, there was the Global Ibogaine Therapist Alliance, was an organization that tried to, move forward, also working with communities, some, clinical guidelines and so forth. But really, we need to, I think, really take a pause for a moment to say, what is going on, with iboga, and what are good strategies to lay out to move this forward, specifically within the framework of the opioid epidemic. It's just incredible how many people are dying from opioid overdose. Mm-hmm. And so, there's really a need for something like this. So how can we make that happen, and make it happen without the medicalization also avoids some other cultural practices to take place. So one example is in Canada, the ibogaine was recognized as a prescription medication. So you would say, wow, major step forward, until you discover that it can only be used and prescribed if phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials are done. That's about $20 million, dollars, and probably 20 years forward. Until then, nobody can even touch it. Not even other users, no? So it's in a way, maybe compassionate use can be an option for people to have access, but also kind of the medicalization can be a restrictive, more restrictive than what it is now. Iboga is not illegal in many parts of the world. It's not under international control, not the ibogaine either. So we have to also be careful there on how to move that forward, which allows cultural practices to continue and make it available in a safe way. So we have a good medicalization process, which really makes it an option, adds it to the toolbox of other addiction treatment options. No, and right now, ibogaine is still not very accepted, except in a few countries like New Zealand, South Africa, where it can be used as a medicine.
Mm-hmm. All right. So my last question, as we wrap up. Ben, what role do you think that ayahuasca and other plants have or should have for humanity?
Well, so what I said before, no, I think it is it is a cultural adaptogen. No, it's something that we need and can help us as humans being in harmony in a harmonious relationship with nature and kind of grow as human beings and just cope with the society and the environment that we're dealing with now. So just as the whole values of of a reciprocal relationship with the natural and the plant and the animal kingdom, but also kind of the values that have come under pressure, big corporate interest and things we are seeing which is really destroying the planet. Kind of how can we humans kind of overcome those short-term greed or different things that are really endangering the world at this point. So I think these plants have a role to play there. I don't think they're going to magically just solve all our problems, but they are important, I think, and can play an important role. But it's a matter of really, I think, integrating them properly in our contemporary society in a way which really respects the cultural diversity that these practices have since way before the drug control system came in place, and so I think that's a challenge. But I think they have an important role to play, and they should have that space.
Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for your time sharing the work of ICEERS. How can the audience best stay in touch with you, Ben? We are changing our website, so I hope after summer we'll have an up-to-date website where, which will be very clear about everything we're doing. At this moment, the iceers.org website is not really fully reflecting all the work we're doing. But on the blog news.iceers.org, there's where we kind of do some updates. There's also the possibility to subscribe to our newsletter. And our Facebook, facebook.com/iceers, or Twitter, you can also follow our activity. And then just check out our websites. No? All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to wish you a beautiful rest of your day in Barcelona. Really miss the beautiful city and looking forward to seeing you again in person.
Yes, thank you so much for the conversation.
Bye-bye,
everybody. Bye-bye.